And joining me to talk about some of this important stuff and the all-important Supreme Court race is Jake Curtis, who's the General Counsel for the Institute for Reforming Government. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you, Jake?
Doing real well. Thanks for joining me today. Let's just start with Liberal candidate Susan Crawford's background. This is a woman who is basically a Jim Doyle and Democrat Party legal henchman or henchwoman before she was made Dane County judge, correct? But she claims she's going to be an agnostic on challenges to voter ID and Act 10. How big a threat do you think there really is to our Walker-era reforms here?
There's a huge threat, Jay. And first of all, I'm glad that you're leading with that point. I don't think really anybody has focused on that. And she claims to be kind of this nonpartisan public official, and even really knocks Judge Schimmel for being the previously elected Attorney General, right, as a partisan, and somehow because she's never formally held a partisan elected position, that she is somehow truly the nonpartisan candidate, and that's obviously ridiculous. As you said, Jay, she was the chief legal counsel for Governor Doyle. I served as an agency chief legal counsel for Governor Walker. I'm proud of that, but one doesn't get a job like that if they're not really part of the movement, so to speak. And so you're not becoming chief legal counsel to a governor if you're not kind of fully embraced by whatever party is in power.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, Jay, we could go down the entire list, and we certainly at IRG have written extensively about this. But the issues that people really care about, all the reforms that all of us, including talk radio and everybody that's part of the center-right movement, worked so hard for, or during the Walker era, is truly at risk. Mm-hmm. And if we could just take 1 second to kind of dive into the weeds a little bit, what they're doing is they're undermining what's called rational basis review. I know that's kind of wonky, but when people talk about a super legislature, that's what they're doing in these cases. And right, it's important to know we have 2 years now of a progressive majority, so this isn't just theory. We know what they're going to do. And so when you look at somebody like Susan Crawford and her background on, for example, voter ID, she has publicly stated, because she was an advocate, right? She was part of strategic litigation for liberal groups that was suing following the passage of voter ID. She called it very much like a poll tax. She called it draconian, and she represented the League of Women Voters. And again, I say this as somebody who has been involved in strategic litigation. You don't get cases like that if you are not fully trusted by your side of the movement, which is fine. But then don't claim to be this nonpartisan.
Yep, she worked against Act 10. In a 2018 op-ed she wrote, she boasted about fighting against voter ID and Act 10. She said she fought attacks on public education, which is, of course, code for she defended the teachers' unions and tried to kill off Act 10. So what I really wanted to focus on today more than anything was it's a very good bet that she's against any alternative to public education. So even though it hasn't been talked about all that much, really, Wisconsin school choice could be under threat here, don't you think, if she gets on this court?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you're kind of raising some of the issues that I get it. We're at kind of peak political season right now, where we're a few days left. The reality is there are still some really important issues that aren't getting highlighted in these ads that people still need to consider when they're voting and look, judge the candidates. When it comes to education choice, and I think it's important to realize, you're absolutely right, school choice is on the line, right? There was a case that was filed last year, and essentially the Supreme Court punted. Now, I don't think it's because they wouldn't love to get a case challenging school choice on the merits. Remember, when school choice was passed in the 90s, there was significant litigation. It was upheld on a 4-3 decision, so a close decision. It's very possible that you get a new challenge, and if they have a chance to overturn school choice, they absolutely will. But we're in this era where parents want an all-the-above approach to education, whether it's private, religious-based school choice, virtual, charter. I actually just wrote a piece with Matt Batesel from American Majority in the Federalist about homeschooling. There's 30,000 kids that are homeschooled in the state of Wisconsin. Susan Crawford's husband literally wrote a book about how you attack homeschooling, all the evils of homeschooling, and why, and I'm not making this up, how parents and other interested individuals can use litigation tactics to undermine homeschooling.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. I'm talking with Jake Curtis. You did write this very interesting piece at the Federalist on Susan Crawford's husband, Sean Peters, that I think helps define Susan Crawford because it answers the question, is she really radical enough to strike down school choice in Wisconsin? And might choice be under real threat if she were to win this race? Well, Sean Peters is an anti-choice advocate who actually wrote a book about how we should take away a parent's right to homeschool. I mean, now that's radical. And as you say, 30,000 Wisconsin children are homeschooled. Homeschooled kids test a lot higher, I think a lot higher in reading proficiency, which is, of course, what sets a child up for success in life, even more so than math skills or anything else. And I'm glad that you wrote this clown's book read this clown's book so I didn't have to. But you say it's replete with anti-conservative and anti-religious sentiments too, right? I mean, it basically suggests parents are too dumb to homeschool their children, right?
Right. And that's, look, I mean, at IRG, right, we pour through data. I get it. If you're in the think tank world, if you're an academic, you can have reasonable debates about numbers and test scores. I think where he crosses the line is he talks about the harm done to children that are homeschooled, about the particular harm to girls. And look, Matt and Matt with his wife, myself with my wife, we homeschool our kids through 8th grade. I mean, it's a very rich learning environment. Our daughter is frankly the one that has just excelled the most academically. So, to say that if you're a homeschool parent, you need to, for example, he suggests an IQ test for homeschool parents and rigorous certifications and ongoing testing, which frankly just completely undermines the whole point of whether it's homeschooling or virtual schooling or charter schooling or any of the above options, that you want to empower parents. I mean, that's I think really the critical issue that I have with the book, is that he wants to undermine the role of parents. And yes, there are going to be a few bad actors that homeschool or send their kids to a virtual school and just really aren't paying attention to their kids' education. In my experience, that is the minority, the significant minority. Most people, if you're homeschooling, are 100% invested in your kids' education. If you're going to virtual school, whatever you're choosing as a parent. And ultimately it comes down to parents. Is it the government that should be making decisions about your kids, or parents?
Right,
I mean,
because
that's the core.
What Peters is really trying to do is take this away as an option for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the book really amounts to when you look at it. And he's part of this movement, then, that insists the left actually use the force of legislative and legal action to ban homeschooling in Wisconsin and nationally. So you'd like to know, I mean, does the woman who's asking voters to put her on the Supreme Court agree with those views or not?
Well, that's what's relevant for purposes of this election. That's why we wrote this piece. I mean, we have a problem with the book to begin with, but then you start asking, well, this is her husband. And look, it is, I believe, 1984 when, it was statutorily home-based education. That's the kind of the legal term that was enshrined in state law. So it is a statutory right. And you have to wonder, if there were a challenge to homeschooling, how would she objectively review this? And Jay, back to your first question, that's, I think, the concern a lot of people have with Susan Crawford is, when you look at her background, when you look at her public statements, like you said, Act 10, exactly, the quote is, she fought against Act 10 and was part of the MTI plaintiff group in that Juan Colas decision, the infamous Juan Colas decision that we all remember. I mean, she has a long history. And look, I've been involved in things like that on the conservative side. I get it. But I'm not running for a nonpartisan judicial office. She is. And Brad Schimmel has said, look, I was a partisan elected attorney general, but, I think his response is, focused on the core issue of, he's going to rule based on a philosophy of textualism and originalism. Mm-hmm. She simply has not articulated anything remotely close to a judicial philosophy. She's frankly running the playbook from 2023 that Justice Protasiewicz did, and she's going to campaign and then decide on her values. That's the problem here.
Yep. We're talking with Jake Curtis. Now, on top of her radical political views, we have this judicial record to look at, in which Crawford has gone very soft on all sorts of criminals and seems to have a particularly soft spot for child sex offenders. I mean, in last week's debate, she said 3 times she stands by her very soft sentences of just 4 or 5 years in prison for what should be decades-long sentences given to these predators. I mean, I just can't think of a worse example of someone Wisconsinites would want on this court, because she does seem to be, her entire adult life seems to be motivated by her political leanings.
Right, and I'm glad you're raising that point in the debate. I'm sure, you, me, and maybe eight other people actually watched the whole debate, but that was a very telling moment. I thought Brad Schimmel did an excellent job really pouncing on her response. If you listen closely, that was an egregious example, right? The individual, I believe, in that case was eligible for 60 years in prison.
Yep.
The state was requesting 10 years. She ultimately, I believe it was a 4-year sentence that she handed down. Mm-hmm. But then she explained why she did it. And I thought that was so telling. That there are obviously elements that a judge has to go through when making a sentencing decision. And she basically said that was the lowest possible sentence she could give while still protecting public safety. Now, right. I think we would all disagree with that approach, but I thought Judge Schimmel did a really good job kind of pouncing on it and pointing out, when the state is requesting 10 years, your job is not to try to drill down to the lowest possible number of years, right? If the state is presenting a reasonable argument as to why this person needs to be incarcerated for any number of years, and in that case it was 10, why the need to go down to 4? And it just showed how she approaches these issues relating to public safety.
Exactly. It's an awful lot about personal feelings and personal philosophy rather than what the law says. Well, we're way late, but it was interesting stuff. So thanks for being on the show today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it.
Jake Curtis of the Institute for Reforming Government.